Most people who later encountered this moment believed Michael Jackson was tired. Some thought he was bored. Almost no one thought he was in pain. For decades, people had a very specific image of what pain was supposed to look like. Pain meant collapse. Pain meant stopping. Pain meant visible failure. Michael Jackson didn't collapse. He adjusted. And because he adjusted, people assumed there was nothing wrong. Accounts from the final rehearsals describe him moving through the routine for Earth Song. His body followed the choreography, but there was a hesitation in each pivot, a fractional delay before his weight shifted. The crew at the time interpreted it as a performer who needed more energy. What they didn't see was a man calculating how many steps he could take before the next wave hit his lower back. This wasn't new. The pain had been there for years, accumulating like sediment, layer upon layer of injury and stress that his body carried forward into each performance, each rehearsal, each day. But the people around him had learned to interpret it differently. The Pepsi commercial accident in 1984 left second- and third-degree burns across his scalp. What was documented was flames spreading across his head while he continued performing, unaware, until someone tackled him to the ground. What the cameras didn't capture was the next 15 years of headaches, the sensitivity to light, the nerve damage that made certain movements trigger stabbing sensations behind his eyes. Interviewers questioned the sunglasses indoors. Tabloids suggested canceled appearances were dodging responsibility. Head injuries don't end when the skin heals. They change how the brain processes light, sound, and stress. Stage lights that once felt normal became triggers for migraines that could last hours. The heat from pyrotechnics, the flash of cameras, even certain color temperatures could turn a performance into an endurance test. To outsiders, sunglasses look like attitude. To someone with nerve damage, their survival. But explaining that requires people to believe invisible damage is real. His lupus diagnosis came in the mid-1980s. The condition attacks the body's own tissues, causing joint pain, fatigue, and sensitivity to sunlight. It explained many things: the exhaustion he felt even after sleeping, the inflammation in his hands that made gripping a microphone painful, the way his skin reacted to stage lights. But the diagnosis stayed private, and without that context, his behavior looked like something else. The gloves people assumed were for show. The frequent breaks they thought were precious. Invisible illnesses create a particular problem. They fluctuate. One day the inflammation is manageable. The next day, standing up requires calculation. This inconsistency feeds suspicion. If you could perform yesterday, why not today? If you can do this task, why can't you do that one? The nature of conditions like lupus doesn't fit the narrative people expect from illness. These conditions are unpredictable, variable, responding to factors that aren't always visible. They expect linear progression or linear recovery. What they don't expect is someone who functions well one week and barely functions the next. There's no visible change to explain the difference. The 1999 bridge collapse during rehearsals in Munich left him with long-term physical strain in his back. He fell several feet, landing hard on a platform that gave way beneath him. The immediate injury was treated, but the long-term damage wasn't something that could be fixed with a few weeks of rest. Scar tissue formed, nerve pathways rerouted. His spine developed compensatory curves to avoid the damaged areas. Standing for long periods became an exercise in pain management. The requests for chairs, time to rest, schedule adjustments, all interpreted as difficulty. By the 2000s, the narrative was fixed. To many people, pain and capability were mutually exclusive. If you could perform at that level, they reasoned, you couldn't be suffering that much. The logic seemed sound. He's on stage, he's dancing, he's hitting the notes, he's generating millions in revenue. How bad could it really be? This reasoning appears in workplaces, medical settings, and personal relationships everywhere. The assumption is that true pain would make performance impossible. If someone can function, especially at a high level, then either the pain isn't real or it's being exaggerated for sympathy or accommodation. This logic feels intuitive. It's also wrong. Pain and performance aren't mutually exclusive. They coexist in professional athletes who play through injuries, in patients managing ongoing physical strain who maintain demanding careers, in anyone who has learned that stopping isn't an option. The ability to perform despite pain doesn't disprove the pain. It proves the opposite, that the person has developed enough coping mechanisms, enough mental discipline, enough fear of the consequences of stopping to push through anyway. The pain was real. The interpretation was not. The thing about long-term physical pain is that it doesn't announce itself with drama. There's no single moment of collapse that makes everyone understand. Instead, it's there every morning when you wake up. A constant companion that shapes how you move, how you sit, how you plan your day around the moments when you know it will spike. People who live with it learn to function anyway, because stopping isn't an option. But that functionality gets misread. If you can perform, people assume you're fine. If you're not fine, they assume you're exaggerating. Performance itself temporarily masks pain through well-documented physiological mechanisms. Adrenaline suppresses pain signals. Focus narrows awareness to the immediate task. The body prioritizes the urgent over the chronic. Athletes play through torn ligaments. Dancers finish performances on stress fractures. The human body can be pushed past its limits for short bursts when stakes are high enough. But this suppression isn't healing. It's deferral. The pain that gets pushed aside during a 2-hour show doesn't disappear. It waits. After the adrenaline drops, after the focus dissolves, after the audience goes home, the body presents its bill. What was manageable under stage lights becomes unbearable in a quiet hotel room. The inflammation that was ignored compounds. The muscles that were forced past their range develop new damage. This is why people who perform through persistent physical pain often seem fine during the performance and collapse after. The public sees the 2 hours on stage. They don't see the 12 hours of recovery it requires, or the medication needed to manage the aftermath, or the calculated trade-offs being made between performing today and functioning tomorrow. But the objection persists. If he was really suffering that much, could he have performed at all? For most people, pain means stopping. It means being unable to work, unable to move, unable to continue. Accepting that someone who takes the stage, who dances, who sings, could be in severe pain requires abandoning a familiar definition of what pain looks like. It breaks the mental model most people use to assess whether suffering is real. Records reviewed later showed prescriptions for pain management going back decades. The treatments addressed documented physical injuries accumulated over decades. The burns, the lupus, the back injuries, the broken bones from various accidents, the joint damage from 30 years of dancing on hard surfaces. Each injury added to the cumulative load his body carried. What made his situation distinct wasn't just the nature of the injuries, but the timeline. He started performing professionally at age 6. By the time most people begin their careers, he had already logged 15 years of rigorous physical work. The years when bones are still growing, when the body is most vulnerable to lasting damage from repetitive stress, were spent rehearsing, performing, touring. Most professional dancers have a career span of 15 to 20 years before their bodies require rest or transition to less physically demanding work. He was 50 years into constant performance with no extended breaks. The cumulative effect isn't linear. Damage compounds. Scar tissue from old injuries creates new stress points. Compensatory movements to protect one damaged area create damage in another. The body that might recover from acute injury with proper rest never gets that rest. So acute injuries become chronic conditions. The performance standard expected of him also created unique pressure. A backup dancer can modify movements. A touring musician can adjust set lists. He was expected to deliver the moonwalk, the spins, the precision that defined his reputation. Audiences paying for tickets weren't coming to see an adjusted version. They expected the level of performance they remembered, even as the body delivering it was decades older and carrying accumulated damage that would have ended most performing careers. But before those records became public, the word difficult appeared in every profile. So did diva and unprofessional. The language used to describe his behavior shaped how it was understood. Medical terminology became entertainment industry jargon. Exhausted became unmotivated. Pain management became making demands. Physical limitations became difficult to work with. Requesting accommodation became being controlling. This translation happens systematically in media coverage. The shift from neutral description to loaded interpretation is subtle but decisive. A headline reading, "Jackson cancels rehearsal due to medical issue," carries different weight than "Jackson skips rehearsal again." The first suggests a reason beyond his control. The second implies a pattern of avoidance. Both might describe the same event, but only one invites skepticism. Language also determines what questions get asked. When someone is described as demanding, the focus shifts to their behavior rather than their needs. When their requests are framed as excessive, attention moves from why they're asking to how often they're asking. The underlying condition becomes background noise. The perceived difficulty becomes the story. This pattern extends beyond one person. It's visible in how chronic illness gets discussed broadly, claiming disability rather than having disability, complaints rather than symptoms, high maintenance rather than requires medical accommodation. The vocabulary itself prejudges credibility. The entertainment industry operates on schedules set months or years in advance. Venues are booked, contracts are signed, insurance policies are written based on projected revenue. Hundreds of people's jobs depend on the production moving forward. In this structure, illness becomes an inconvenience, not a signal. The question isn't, "Is he okay?" It's, "Can we still make this work?" This isn't unique to one production or one person. It's how large-scale entertainment functions. Tours are built around financial projections that assume a certain number of shows will happen. Cancellations trigger penalty clauses. Postponements affect venue availability, crew schedules, promotion timelines. The machine is designed to move forward, and individual health becomes one variable among many that needs to be managed, not a reason to stop. When someone says they need rest, the production team calculates, can we adjust the schedule without triggering penalties? Can we reduce rehearsal hours and still deliver the show? Can we bring in additional medical support to keep things moving? The focus is on accommodation within the existing framework, not on whether the framework itself is sustainable for the person at its center. The machine had no mechanism for stopping. There's a particular kind of isolation that comes from being in pain that others can't see. You can describe it, but without visible proof, you're asking people to trust your internal experience. And when your internal experience doesn't match their expectations of how someone in pain should behave, that trust erodes. If you can still perform, they think you're fine. If you say you're not fine, they think you're lying. Explaining ongoing physical limitations requires constant repetition. Every new person on the crew needs the same explanation. Every change in schedule requires restating why certain adjustments are necessary. Every missed rehearsal or altered blocking needs justification. And with each repetition, you watch for the moment when the listener's expression shifts from concern to skepticism. Eventually, many people managing these conditions stop explaining, not because the pain has lessened, but because the effort of advocacy becomes another form of exhaustion. It's easier to adjust privately, to develop workarounds, to push through without comment, than to face the doubt that comes with asking for accommodation. The silence that follows isn't acceptance. It's surrender to the reality that help requires belief, and belief requires proof that chronic conditions don't offer. Some people close to him knew. His personal physician saw the medical reality. A few long-time collaborators understood that the requests weren't about control or perfectionism, but the broader industry narrative had already formed. The insurance company for the This Is It tour required a medical examination. The doctor who conducted it noted Jackson's weight loss, his fatigue, his ongoing physical limitations. But the show was scheduled, contracts were signed, and the machine of production doesn't stop for things like that. Adjustments were made where possible. The rest was expected to be managed. In the final weeks, people noticed he seemed more tired than usual. His weight had dropped. He wore extra layers because he was always cold. The heaters he requested were provided, but noted as another requirement. His stamina struggles were documented as performance issues that needed addressing. What nobody seemed to consider was whether the tour itself was survivable for someone in his physical condition. The schedule called for 50 shows in London, 50 performances, each 2 hours long, each requiring him to dance, sing, and maintain the level of perfection audiences expected from Michael Jackson. For a healthy 30-year-old in peak condition, that would be punishing. For a 50-year-old with ongoing physical limitations, lupus, old burn injuries, and a damaged spine, it was something else entirely. Consider the timeline. The Pepsi accident happened in 1984. He was 25. The bridge collapse in Munich was 1999. He was 40. The This Is It tour was scheduled for 2009. He was 50. Same body, 25 years of accumulated damage. But bodies don't heal the same way at 50 that they do at 25. Recovery times lengthen. Inflammation persists longer. Old injuries become arthritic. The resilience that allowed a younger body to bounce back from injury diminishes with each passing year. Between 1984 and 2009, that body never stopped. Tours, albums, performances, rehearsals. The gaps between projects weren't rest. They were preparation for the next project. The physical demands didn't decrease as his age increased. If anything, the expectation was that each performance would match or exceed what came before. The standard was set by what a 20-year-old body could do. The 50-year-old body was expected to meet it. 50 shows means 100 hours of performance, but performance is only part of the load. Add rehearsals, minimum 4 hours per show day, often more. Add travel time between the hotel and venue. Add time for costume changes, makeup, physical preparation. Add the recovery time that ongoing physical limitations require. That time wasn't built into the schedule. A single 2-hour show might require 12 hours of total physical output when you factor in everything around it. Multiply that by 50. The human body needs rest to repair muscle tissue, to reduce inflammation, to restore energy. A touring schedule that intense doesn't allow for that, even for someone without underlying conditions. For someone managing lupus flares, long-term physical strain, and old injuries, each show draws from reserves that aren't replenishing. By show 10, you're operating at a deficit. By show 20, that deficit is compounding. By show 50, the question isn't whether the body can perform, it's whether the body can survive. But that's not how it was framed. The conversation was about whether he was committed enough, whether he was trying hard enough, whether he could deliver what was promised. His physical limitations weren't part of the equation because nobody was looking at them that way. Pain doesn't show up in production schedules. Fatigue doesn't appear on contract riders. A posthumous medical review documented the underlying conditions: the scarring on his scalp from the burns, the arthritis in his joints, the damage to his spine, the overall physical state of someone who had spent decades pushing a body that needed rest. The prescribed treatments were not recreational. They were part of documented medical care for chronic conditions. After he died, people started looking back at the footage, the interviews, the accounts from people who worked with him. Things that had seemed like eccentricity or difficult behavior took on different meaning. The sunglasses weren't affectation. They were managing light sensitivity from old head trauma. The gloves weren't costume. They were covering skin damaged by lupus. The requests for schedule changes weren't about being controlling. They were about trying to conserve enough energy to make it through the next performance. The medical records that became public after his death told the same story he had been trying to tell for years. The difference was that now the information came with the authority of documentation. Posthumous medical findings carry weight that personal testimony doesn't. Medical records from multiple physicians over decades create a timeline that individual complaints couldn't establish. Death itself became the proof that was required for people to believe what had been true all along. This raises uncomfortable questions. Why does evidence need to be posthumous to be credible? Why does chronic pain require validation from death before it's taken seriously? Why is a person's own description of their physical experience considered less reliable than a medical examiner's report about their body after they're gone? The answer isn't complicated. Living people who report pain can be questioned, doubted, tested for consistency. Dead people can't defend themselves, but they also can't be accused of exaggeration. The medical evidence that emerges after death is final in a way that testimony during life never is. It can't be argued with or reframed. It simply exists as fact. This forces a retrospective reevaluation that wasn't offered when it might have mattered. The shift in understanding came too late to change anything. You can't undo years of dismissal with posthumous recognition. You can't give someone the rest they needed after they're gone. The regret that followed was sincere but useless. It didn't help him. It doesn't help the next person whose pain gets dismissed as drama, whose requests for accommodation get labeled as difficulty, whose physical limitations get interpreted as lack of commitment. There's no lesson here that makes it better. No neat conclusion that transforms the story into something redemptive. Just the flat acknowledgement that we watched someone suffer in real time and called it something else. We had the information. We had his words. We had the visible evidence of a body breaking down under pressure. But we chose to see it differently because that version fit better with what we expected from him. He asked for help in the ways available to him. He tried to explain. He adjusted his life around the pain, developed strategies to manage it, found ways to keep performing despite it. None of that was enough to change the narrative while he was alive. The truth came out in posthumous medical reviews and released records, in the retrospective analysis that happens after someone is gone. This pattern didn't end in 2009. It plays out in workplaces where employees with chronic conditions are told they don't look sick. It happens in medical offices where patients are dismissed as drug-seeking when they report persistent pain. It appears in personal relationships where invisible disabilities are treated as excuses rather than realities. The term high functioning has become a way to invalidate suffering. If someone can work, maintain relationships, complete daily tasks, their pain must not be severe enough to warrant accommodation. The ability to function becomes evidence against the need for help. The same logic that questioned why he could perform if he was really suffering applies to countless people managing invisible conditions while maintaining careers, raising families, fulfilling obligations. The skepticism hasn't changed. The language has shifted slightly. Fewer people openly dismiss persistent limitations as drama now, but the underlying doubt remains. People still wait for proof they can see before believing pain they can't. They still measure credibility by consistency, not understanding that chronic conditions are inherently inconsistent. They still assume that high performance and high pain are mutually exclusive, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Understanding came. He didn't. In the rehearsal space, no one was shouting. No one was arguing. But no one was saying stop either. Everyone could sense something was wrong. But the schedule kept moving. The crew checked equipment. The dancers marked positions. The production team consulted clipboards. The awareness was there, quiet and unspoken, but it had no mechanism to override the timeline, so the work continued. The concern remained suspended in the air between what everyone noticed and what anyone felt empowered to address. That final rehearsal has been described in detail. It can be traced in descriptions of how he moved through Earth Song, the slight hesitation in his movements, the way he conserved energy between takes. If you know what to look for, it's all there. But knowing what to look for requires understanding that came too late to matter. This channel exists for stories like this. Subscribing keeps them possible. The question isn't whether we could have known. The question is, when he told us, why didn't we believe him?